All right, welcome back to the Explainer. Today we are going to dive into a really cool design pattern called the chain of responsibility. Seriously, this thing can take a tangled mess of conditional logic in your code and turn it into something that's clean, scalable, and, well, just elegant. So, let me ask you something. Does your code ever just look like this? Like an endless ladder of if-else statements? I'm pretty sure every developer out there knows exactly what I'm talking about. You've got this one function, or maybe a single class, and it's trying to handle a ton of different conditions. And before you know it, you've got this giant monolithic block of code that's just trying to do everything. Yeah, take a look at this. This is a classic example from, say, a customer service app. You have one class that's trying to juggle simple requests, complex ones, and then you have the escalated issues. And look, at first glance, you might think, hey, it works. But anyone who's had to maintain code like this knows the truth. It gets messy, and it gets messy fast. So let's talk about this a bit. Because while this approach feels simple and straightforward at the beginning, it's actually creating some major headaches for you down the road. We're talking about four core problems that can turn your code base into an absolute nightmare to work with. Okay, let's break these down. First up, you've got tight coupling. This basically locks your main class to all of the handling logic. It knows way too much. Then there's the single responsibility principle violation. Your class is doing at least two jobs here. It's routing the request and it's handling it. That's a big no-no. Of course, you run into huge scalability issues. Every time you need to add a new request type, what do? You just tack on another else if statement, right? Your class just gets bigger and bigger. And finally, all of this leads to a serious lack of flexibility. Trying to add or change logic becomes this super risky operation, because you might break something else entirely. So the big question is, how do we fix this? And do we have to just rewrite everything from scratch? Well, the good news is, no. You don't have to burn it all down. There's a really elegant solution that was designed for exactly this kind of problem. And here's our hero for today's story, the chain of responsibility pattern. It's what's known as a behavioral pattern, and trust me, it's going to fundamentally change the way you think about handling these kinds of requests. So what's the big idea here? Well, instead of having one giant object that tries to do everything, we create a line of specialists. Each one is a potential handler. When a request comes in, it just gets passed along this chain of handlers, one by one, until one of them says, yep, I can take this one. And the coolest part? The original object that sent the request has no idea who's actually going to end up handling it. It's completely decoupled. All right, that sounds great in theory, but how do we actually build this chain? Let's take a look at how it works in practice. It's really all about forging these links, creating simple, focused objects, and just linking them together. The core mechanic here is it's just a genius in its simplicity. Each handler in the chain really only knows one thing: who's next in line. It has one job. It looks at the request and asks, can I handle this? If the answer is yes, great, it does its thing and the whole process stops right there. But if the answer is no, it doesn't throw an error. It doesn't panic. It just says, not my problem, and passes the request on to the next handler. Okay, so let's walk through an example. Let's say a complex request comes in. First, it hits the basic support handler. That handler takes one look and says, is this a simple request? Nope. So what does it do? It just passes it down the line to the next link, the technical support handler. Now that handler texts the request and says, Is this a complex request? Yes, it is. So it handles the request and that's it. The chain ends right there. The request found its home and nobody else down the line even has to look at it. It's just like a customer service call being transferred to exactly the right department. So, what's the big payoff here? Why go through all this trouble? Let's do a little before and after comparison to see how we go from that messy coupled code to something, well, something clean. I mean, the difference is just night and day, right? The old way was tightly coupled. The chain pattern is loosely coupled. The old way was a pain to scale. Now it's easily scalable. You see where I'm going with this? We're going from violating the single responsibility principle to obeying it. We're going from something that was inflexible and super risky to change to a system that's flexible and safe. Adding a new request type? You just create a new handler and pop it into the chain. No touching the old code. It's a huge win. Okay, so this is obviously a really powerful tool to have in your design toolbox. But like any tool, you gotta know when to pull it out. So let's talk about the specific situations where the chain of responsibility pattern is going to be your best friend. So here are the signals to look for. You should definitely think about using this pattern when you have multiple objects that could potentially handle a request, but you don't know which specific one it'll be ahead of time. It's also perfect for when you really need to decouple the sender of a request from its receivers. And here's a really cool part. You can use it when you want to be able to change the order of the handlers dynamically, maybe even at runtime without breaking anything. And there you have it. That's the chain of responsibility pattern. It's a beautifully simple idea, really, that can transform that tangled code into a clean, maintainable, and totally scalable chain of command. So, I'll leave you with this question. Think about your own code right now. What complex process could you simplify by turning it into a chain? The next time you're about to write another else if, just take a second and ask yourself, wait a minute, could this be a chain?